Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Thursday night special discussion on the supremacy of God within the context of COVID restrictions in Canada and how that relates to real life. Because I think that there's a disconnect between the governing documents, the documents that politicians use to govern us, and how that actually plays out in day-to-day life. And we do live in a country where our charter rights are preambled by the supremacy of God, and the rule of law is paramount, is something that should be taken into consideration before everything else in our Constitution. So why is something like Liz during our green room chat said, my religious exemption was denied? Is that something that is part and parcel? And I think that we'll start here, because I think this is a very good fertile ground for discussion. When we've got a constitution, a charter of rights that recognizes that the supremacy of God and the rule of law, and in the same breath, the institutions that are a part of that country feel comfortable denying religious exemptions, how does that fit? How does that square? I have a hard time squaring that. And it's funny because Jason and I are Jason's the fire that started this whole conversation. And neither one of us thought of this angle to put on our little crib sheet of things to discuss in this. So I think that it's funny that one of the reasons you came, Liz, was something that we didn't even make it into the radar. And I think it's such a strong part. So why do you think that? So can you tell us what your story is and kind of what happened and how, and be as cryptic as you like, what happened with your religious exemption?
I'm a registered nurse and I worked in long-term care. I was terminated this Monday. I've been on a 2-month unpaid leave of absence till Monday when I was exempted. If I start crying, please forgive me. I've been a nurse for 46 years. I've spent 17 years in this long-term care. I opened it, when it was brand new. So I'm a born again Christian, and it was the many factors in the COVID vaccine didn't make sense to me. I do have my basic training in infection control. I was the infection control nurse till COVID came along, and the government gave nursing homes money for an infection control person, and they gave the job to somebody who was unqualified because they didn't want to pay an RN.
Yep.
Plus there's so few RNs, we're lacking. So anyways, I put in, there was 2 things I could do, was medical, which I don't have a medical reason not to take the vaccine. I don't want the vaccine. I don't know how you make a vaccine in 4 or 6 months. It's unusual.
Just because we've got you and you're an RN, are there any other vaccines that have been brought to market in that timeline at all? Like from a year to 6 months to a year?
I don't think so. Probably the H1N1 was probably the closest, and then we found out that it was detrimental to some young men.
Yeah, causing narcolepsy.
Yeah, so it was. That's the only other one that I can think of that was that quickly. Okay. And can I just parallel? I don't want to get off the subject, but if you will notice, there was on the news that it was in Canada, I believe, they're working on a vaccine for dementia. Well, that's very important to me because I work in gerontology, and they've been working 10 years. And they said, we have a long way to go. So when I hear things like that, I think, oh yeah, anyways.
Yeah, no, well, it makes sense. And so now just to back up, before 2020, you said, or before this whole COVID thing happened, you weren't required to get, or were you required to get certain medical vaccines to work? Yeah.
No, they ask that you have the flu shot. That is one thing, but it's not mandatory that you take it.
Okay.
There's how you get not around flu shots is if you have flu in your facility, then you have to get Tamiflu, and you have to prove that you have taken it within the first 24 hours of the flu outbreak in the home, or you have to go off work for the whole time. So there's parameters you have to do for that sort of thing.
Yeah, maybe you and
So,
I should set aside a time to have you on Speaking Moistly, and we can do an interview, because I'm interested in digging into your story as well. So, and you've got lots of,
but
because I've got like 10 other questions.
I know my religious exemption was just denied. And also what happened was the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care took out the religious exemption and just said you had to have a medical exemption. It had to have that you had a reaction to the first vaccine.
Yeah. So they didn't give you any reason for the refusal on the
They
religious
told me
exemption?
there was nothing in the Bible that said that religiously, and I was insulted.
Yeah.
I read the Bible every day. In fact, on a weekly basis, I have a Bible study with a group
Yeah.
of women.
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm insulted that Chartwell thinks they know the Bible and why I'm exempting out of this.
Do you
for
have
my
that?
faith.
Do you have that in writing? Is it like, did they send it in an email? Like,
Yeah, I have that.
do you? Oh, could you like, you don't have
I
to
don't
run and
know.
get
I
it.
just kind of.
You don't have to shit. No. Think about it. I would love to see the language, because the whole idea is, it's offensive, because at a certain point, things changed. And I don't know if it was 2019, 2020, 2021, but up to a certain point, if you had an exemption on a vaccine, there wouldn't be anybody who was questioning you, who was saying, well, you don't seem sick. You don't see, like, if you have a religious exemption, nobody would challenge that to a degree, right? Like, you could go to school and you wouldn't have to explain why you didn't want to have the measles, mumps, and rubella, or the HPV. Is that the one? We had kids in my grade 7 class who were Jehovah's Witness, and they didn't want to have these things. They weren't demonized, right? In fact, I think that probably if the school had started to try to demonize Jehovah's Witnesses for not wanting a specific vaccine in like the mid 90s, that would be a problem. And it would be a problem from multiple angles, like just from a societal angle. But now that society's turned on this minority of people who, for whatever reason, in this case religion, don't want to have a medical intervention, now we're evil. And it's very concerning that somebody, like, again, I in the green room, I said I wouldn't consider myself a religious scholar. I'm relying on you guys to help me kind of navigate this in a way that is not offensive, because I don't want to say something that's offensive or wrong or anything like that. But I'm not a religious scholar. And I would say probably that, the bureaucrats who are rolling these things out probably aren't religious scholars. And so them to say, your Bible doesn't say anything about this COVID mRNA vaccine, sounds pretty freaking like arrogant of them to say that it doesn't. Because I think, Jason, could you weigh in? Does the Bible say something about, I hear there's fetal something. There were fetal tissue used in the development of this. Now, it's not used directly in this vaccine, but in the 1970s, there were aborted babies used. They grew the fetal tissue. They used that to develop the vaccines. That technology is used in this vaccine, and ergo, aborted fetal, or aborted, I'm not sure if that's accurate, fetal tissue is used in the development of this vaccine, and that would be a religious exemption that would be accepted under most situations, I think, right? But Jason, correct me, please.
Well, when you get into matters where you can't find a particular chapter and verse in the Bible, you pretty much are relegated to a person's conscience. And so the Bible speaks very heavily on not wanting to violate a person's conscience. And that's where a lot of these matters that do come up that can cause division in people. It generally, even like wearing face masks and those components of it, they don't actually treat them as medical issues. They treat them as, okay, well, God designed the immune system, and so if he's the creator and he knows how this whole system works, then really these are matters of conscience then. And if a person has a weak conscience, then the Bible simply says, don't cause them to violate their conscience. And that's where, if there is something that we are watching, it's not necessarily the immediate last 20 months of time that we have to look at. What we're actually looking at is probably 4 decades worth of consistent compromise. And the best way I can kind of illustrate this is you picture like a teeter-totter, and to kind of leave this maybe indelibly in people's minds, we'll always hear that quote where Trudeau is quoted for, he admires the basic dictatorship of China.
Mhm.
And the CCP government, they have one thing that I just kind of look at this whole matter, and I realize they know how to attack this, and how that's manifested it. I found a couple of YouTubes about this, is they're actually going after the Bible and wanting to take out all the supremacy of God passages, all the sovereignty of God passages, and they're going to create their CCP version of the Bible.
Yeah.
And it may seem like that's just a small little thing, maybe the cherry on top, but really that's kind of where it all starts.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about, we're having a conversation about the supremacy of God, generally you'd like to have it at the very beginning. And then therefore, okay, that dismisses all the other arguments. But generally what does happen is we go through this long slide, and then all of a sudden it comes up again. So that teeter-totter is, okay, if people have confidence in God, their confidence in the government is here. But as their confidence in God diminishes, it seems like the confidence in government takes over. And when we're dealing with people's experiences, when I'll bring this up, and like I said, on a dinner time conversation, I've got a whole system in my mind that says, okay, if then. But really, what seems to be the number one reaction that I have is people have a church experience that comes at it from so many different angles. Mm-hmm. And largely that is based on government involvement in this process in the form of subsidies. So when we look at people and they say, well, they grew up maybe in a particular religious background, or they had some religious involvement, being able to identify how government was starting to put some form of control mechanism in that is generally where I've spent probably most of my time. And then I get back to, okay, now as we get people's confidence back in God, and then now we start diminishing that government aspect.
So yeah, and we'll get to you in just a minute, Thomas. There's a couple of ideas that are really interesting that you kind of brought up there. The increased reliance in God creates less trust in government. As government's more trusted, the trust in God diminishes. I would say that the government themselves are trying to make themselves a religion, right? I would say that they're trying to replace the religion with their own, to meet their own ends. And I don't want to talk over Thomas. So Thomas, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Okay. Well, the charter is a little bit, I mean, when you say that whereas Canada is found on the principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law, that's the preface, that's the top of everything, right?
Yep.
The problem starts with the first, right, where the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out. It's subject to be such reasonable limits prescribed by law as it can demonstrate to be justified in a free and democratic society. So that's where they already put the shebang on everything that goes below. Mm-hmm. Because the government clearly challenges the supremacy of God and put themselves in front of it.
Yes, it's almost as if
there's not a, and I just want to recommend a read. I was digging up a little bit to do some research, and there is, if you Google the supremacy of God and the rule of law, you should come up with an article written by the McGill University. Mm-hmm. It was written in 1984, so shortly after the charter was passed. And it speaks about also that kind of dilemma. And the writing of the charter was based on Baruch Spinoza.
Oh, I read that this afternoon.
Which is a Dutch philosopher from the 1600s.
Yeah. So
again, these are all things like clearly there was a guy in the 1600s that came across stuff like this.
Yes.
Already. Well, so it's not new to us, you know, and to me, like, again, God is first done. Mm-hmm. And I don't care what the government says or not. And in the second paragraph of the charter as well, it says that it is about your own consciousness. And that is supreme to me.
Yeah.
right? And regardless of what the government says I should or shouldn't be doing, if I can't consciously be okay with that, then I can't do it. Done. Right?
Yeah.
Regardless of the consequences. And that's, I guess, we have to live with that, and we have to make our stance that way.
Yep. Sorry, I'm just sharing my screen to get the Constitution up, or the Constitution Act 1982.
I just wanted to point out that even the charter that was written, in some ways, it took away some of our rights that we had with the Bill of Rights.
Yes.
In fact, it's a lesser version of that.
Yeah, it watered it down.
A lot more clarity, and they I suspect, in hindsight, it was written in a more vague way, I should say.
Yes.
Maybe they foresaw that. I mean, knowing that the father of our current prime minister was heavily involved. Doesn't surprise, right?
It almost looks like, when I look at this statement here, like, honestly, it's the Constitution Act 1982, and it says Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It says, whereas Canada is founded upon the principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. Right away, they take away the supremacy of God, and then they say, like, we will only subject it to limits that can be justly demonstrated in a free and democratic society. Like, so
it's already, you got right there, you got like your disclaimer, right?
They usurp it. Like, oh yeah, whereas God is supreme, we're going to be supreme because, blah, blah, blah.
Because Jason is right. There has been attempts in Parliament to take that one out altogether.
Yeah, they just want it gone.
Right?
Yeah.
So that is not, it is an attack on everything.
Yeah. And I do want to highlight this. Number 2 of the section 2 of the Constitution says everyone has the following fundamental freedoms: freedom of conscience and religion. So, I mean, you would think
it doesn't say either which religion, right? That is up to you.
The religion of government.
Anything counts, right?
Yeah. They just mean the religion of government. That's what they mean.
Yeah.
You can believe that the government is here to protect you. Take your next booster. Just keep getting boosters. Max.
I will share
Thomas,
the link in our chat for that opinion piece from the McGill University. It's quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It lays out on the balance between the supremacy of God and the rule of law, which rule of law would be by man versus God, but they're not superseding each other.
Mm-hmm.
They're like equilibrium.
Yeah. Well, they have to be in balance for it to work properly, because, like, you can't legislate my thoughts away, and we have to deal with that. Like, you can't, nobody can legislate my thoughts, my conscience. My body belongs to me, right? You can try and smash that out of people, but you can't create a law. It's like how the current Ontario and Canada, they're trying to implement new restrictions and people aren't going for it. You can't, you could maybe pass the law, but good effing luck enforcing it. Max.
Just to expand upon what you guys and Jilly was mentioning in the chat, I think, like, it's really important to have the supremacy of God in the charter, because if you don't have that, then the government believes that they are, like, held above God, and as we all know, man is fallible, and whenever a government or an individual believes that they can become God, it never ends well throughout history.
No, I agree, but I think that the governments do a good job at convincing themselves they're not trying to usurp or act like that. You know what I mean? Like
sorry.
No, go ahead.
And the worst part of it is that they believe they are the heroes of their own story.
Yes.
And that's what's so difficult about fighting it, is that how do you, like, truly convince them? Like everyone believes that they are the heroes of their own story. The people on the opposite side of us believe that. Mm-hmm. So how can you convince them? Like,
yeah, well, it's a good, I mean, yeah, that's the crux of it, isn't it? Like, it's one of those things where the longer it goes on, the more people forget the way we used to live. The longer people forget what freedom really is, the more difficult it is to get a touchstone back to it. And a good example of that is the pastors who have been arrested and all across Canada. So one of the contentious issues is that some religious places function at higher capacities and are ignored by the enforcement officials, and in fact get, like, security funding, and other religious facilities get scrutinized and shut down, and limits that.
Yeah, like look at churches and even like especially synagogues in Quebec.
Yeah, right. Great example. Yeah, exactly. The synagogues versus the churches, and that was jarring to me, seeing the Jews targeted so openly in Quebec. I didn't realize there was that style of racism there. Like that it was. Is popular the right word?
It's not that again they stood up, right? They going after anybody that stood up. There was a piece from I think Bright Light News. They had a guy on, a pastor, evangelist, who was a whistleblower, stating that he was in a larger congregation like a church, and they basically were bribed not to go against the government. In fact, the opposite. They promised them money or whatever to preach, pro-vaccine, right? So they're going after anybody that is against it for whatever reason. Right? And I think it doesn't matter whether you have a religious exemption or you think you do, or you're conscious. It makes no difference to them.
In a way, the exemptions are just there for appeasement and to give the illusion of choice.
Well, you can't, right? You can't really get the only exemption that's accepted is a medical exemption. You can't really get a medical exemption unless you have an adverse, unless you're approved. They're approved.
Yeah, but that is not true either. It wasn't. I think you posted that the article from the guy who he had legitimate reason, like he had a real bad event. In fact, he was partially paralyzed, and they wouldn't give him the exemption after the first booster.
Yeah, there was that,
right?
Yeah.
So it's all baloney. That the problem is that our charter is based on goodwill, right? Like
Canadians had that in abundance.
Respect me, and we basically don't harm each other, right? And otherwise we leave each other alone and all good.
Yeah.
But that our current government and everybody in the parliament, for that matter, with some very few exceptions, are perfectly fine with that.
Well, they foster it, and they want more of it happening, right? And it's scary because
demons.
The more they wedge and double down, the more division is created. Because like if they say X is happening and I say X isn't happening, now it's an even better wedge. Like it's even more effective.
Divisive.
Yeah. Terry.
So here, our restrictions have come in quite strong. Northern Health for BC. And one of the ones that was really kind of concerning what I read 2 days ago was that all the restrictions for the restaurants and stuff are still in effect. People who are unvaccinated are not allowed in private residence right now. And the other one that they took off, that the bars are open until 10 p.m. They'll serve alcohol until then. All the worshiping services are closed in Northern BC. You are not allowed to go to church. You are not allowed to worship. And then any of the gatherings, there is no dancing and no singing. So I worked for a First Nations community, and that's one of the things that came through on my desk yesterday, is just the exemption for them is there's no exemptions. Like for religious purposes, whatever, how they celebrate culture, any of their creator, how they go their way. But there's no worship. So the church in the village is closed. Wow. We have the highest one, like the addiction rates here are huge. Our suicide rates are huge. So one of the places that people could go was the church to be able to do what they needed to do, to speak with people and get the stuff that they needed, just counseling.
Yeah.
But it's gone. Like it's the center of the community. And when you take that away, like what happens?
Yeah. Well, and it seems purposeful. I mean, I can't look at the purposeful actions of trying to break congregations like Pastor Hildebrandt's, this one's got Pastor Stevens, and others.
They arrested pastors, dragged them off the street in Calgary, the bloody Deerfoot.
Yeah,
they stopped them, Archer.
Yeah.
Yes, I've
Pulaski.
known Archer. When I lived in Calgary, he fed the homeless.
Yeah.
That's what he did.
That
And
was my first introduction to him, was video
yeah,
of him with COVID in a park, and he said, well, people got to eat, like COVID or no
yeah.
COVID, people got to eat, right?
And he's been doing that for
And
years.
I thought to myself, that guy's a hero, right? I thought, holy smoke, like that guy's doing the things that that are honestly preached about, that are told about, like heroism is giving a piece of yourself for the greater good, right? And like that guy's a hero, and they treat him
Yes.
like that. So I watched that, and I said, there's
so much politics involved in that too, because in Calgary, where his stuff is high environment for like the housing, all that kind of stuff. He's been a thorn in Menchie's side for a very long time because of what he does.
Yeah.
And it's like they went after him full force to shut him down and taking him off the Deerfoot like he was some terrorist, or like it was unbelievable, and nothing has been done about it.
No, they've used that as a warning. Like, did you see what we did to Arthur? Because we'll do it to you and worse, right? Like that's scary. And how does that fit in? Like, does the charter, there's a criminal code violation for interrupting church service, right? Like, how is it acceptable to the majority of Canadians to watch our government behave so absurdly, so violently, I think, towards a religion and towards people who are just trying to worship in their own way, right? Which is supposed to be protected in our country. Max.
I think a worse example of this happening was look what they did to Tim Stevens when they arrested him in front of his crying children and family. Like that's like excuse my language, but that's gonna fuck those kids up, probably.
Yeah, I hope not.
Like seeing their father like just frog marched away like that. Like that, like it's got to have some serious psychological impacts on those children.
Yeah. I mean, yes, I'm just thinking about the whole context of that, because there are situations. I saw one Australian guy, he was being arrested by the police, and the police showed up, and the whole thing was caught on camera, and he had kids, young kids, and they said, oh, as we've agreed, you'll come and you'll surrender outside. We won't do this in front of your family, type deal. But he was out an hour and a half later or something like that, because I can't remember the reason, but regardless, like he posted bail or something. But they do appear to be trying to use intimidation tactics. Like, look at this guy. He did something that we don't like. We're going to make an example of him. And it's especially, they almost choose people who've got a story that they can spin.
They try to make them a martyr in a way. Well, they end up making them in some cases a martyr.
Right, but they try and control the story. They try and make the story something that is something that has a threat of like we can discredit this person. Even somebody like Arthur, right? Like somebody who feeds hungry people. Doesn't matter, homeless, hungry people. You can find something in his past, or for whatever way they did it, and you could discredit him, right? And I think they choose people to make big deals out of, and then they, that's part of the media control. But that's not proven. That's just my speculation. Jason.
Obviously, I try to listen in and understand everything and everyone's experiences. And so, like with Thomas at the Charter of Rights, it's one of those documents from a systematic perspective. It's like, okay, if this, then we go to here, then we go to here. And so when I'm saying this, supremacy of God, I'm saying, okay, if we establish this, then everything else will fall in the line. And so when it comes down to like the government, your point there about them wanting to be more religious, that's basically a paraphrase of what Pastor Tim Stevens himself quoted in an interview where he said, it's not that the church has become more political, it's that the government has become more religious. Mm-hmm. And so what we're dealing with then is we got this battle of I guess people needing to have that conscience that says, okay, I'm not wanting to violate my conscience and disobey the government, but then I don't want to violate my conscience and disobey God. And so at that point, what I spend some time probably talking with a lot of people is, okay, how do we kind of approach this subject so we don't get into that pro and anti, but we kind of take this right down the middle path. And when I started understanding communism, and then I started understanding in a way the effect that it has on churches, what it does is it gets into churches in the form of, like I was saying earlier, subsidies, where all of a sudden government's got programs for refugees. And I know, Mark, that's a big passion on your part, because it seems like, why are the churches doing something with immigration that doesn't make sense to our country? And well, that if you follow that through, you'll find out that they're applying for these government grants that get them into the business of resettling and all those political factors. Well, it's money that comes in.
Hold on, I have a question about that. So if how does a church go from preaching the word of God, for lack of a better term, let's say, and I mean that across the board, like whichever religion that you're ascribed to, right? How do you go from preaching the word of your God to your constituents or to your flock, again, lack of a better word, to this grant money is really important, and it's more important than preaching for you? You know what I mean? Because the whole purpose, like, the preacher is not in it for them, right? They're a vehicle for God, as far as I understand it, and they're working on behalf of their supporters, their people that they're preaching to, right? The people they're preaching to are trusting the pastor with their soul and guidance, right? Is that correct? Right? So how do they start chasing the money? Like, is it just simple as people are corruptible and money's an easy one and bingo bango bongo? Is it just that simple?
I don't like to answer a question with another question. But the question would be, why did so many churches take Serb?
Right.
And that's where the government kind of puts people into situations where, okay, and it's kind of, that's where the rubber meets the road with the literal battle of the conscience at that point. But I can pick it up there if some other people want to chime in with some thoughts too, because I've just got this.
Okay, yeah, sure. So we'll go with Ryan and Thomas, and then we'll come back. We'll circle around for your input again, Jason. Thanks. Ryan, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I've been thinking about religions and faith and God and Jesus a lot. The thing is, and it's always through the Bible, it's always through history, that they try to get rid of Jesus Christ. And they're doing the same thing right now. And you look at United Nations and the Economic Forum and all the people that are involved in that. Well, they got the Tower of Babel. They put the statue of the leopard and the bear of Revelations right in front just a week ago. But and it's always been the same thing. They try to get rid of Jesus Christ, and they try to become gods themselves. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing. They're trying to go, like, all these countries have been built on God, on the mind or of God, right? Mm-hmm. And they want that out. They want the technocratic. It's a technocratic dictatorship. Yep. So, and they want to get rid of religion. One second. Yep. And like I say, they want to become the gods of the world. And I was just gonna say something.
Oh no, sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
Oh no, that's fine. It's a technocratic. That's what they want. Mm-hmm. They want. Oh, there it is. They want science to be the new religion. Mm-hmm. They want people to believe in their pseudoscience. Like, don't get me wrong, science, there's lots of good stuff in science. They're going to deceive people with the pseudoscience. Yes. And make that the religion. That's what they want.
Well, the pseudoscience is much easier to control, just like all the cases, right? The case, it's all cases. Oh, cases. It's the pseudoscience versus the science.
They want to be gods, and they want the science to be the new religion. They're trying to get, and they're going to get rid of God.
And the reason, the reason for it is because they can control the pseudoscience. Yeah. Right? Like it's because they can say, this is the thing that you have to care about. Why? Because we said so, because we're the supreme commander of whatever. And because this metric that we told you that you have to care about is high, we have to do this terrible thing that you don't want to do, but we have to do it for your good. And so the Great Leap Forward had a lot of the same hallmarks, right? Like well, if you look into how all of that happened, it can be brutal, right? It can be brutal. And you're right. Like they want to replace God. So when you say that, oh, this is what I wanted to talk about just very quickly. When you say all these countries were built on God, I want to clarify that just a little bit. The Christian Bible specifically, because we're talking UK, Australia, Canada, that's all based on the UK system. So that says the individual is responsible for themselves in the eyes of God, right? And so like the individual responsibility, and that played into law, that played into the creation of law. I'm not responsible for your health. I'm not responsible for your wrongdoing. I'm responsible for my choices, my health, and my wrongdoing. So if I've done something wrong, I have to be responsible for that in the eyes of the law and of God. And so that's I just want to make sure that people understand that's what we mean by the country was founded on that, because without that individual responsibility aspect, we don't have the society that we've built. We have a society of mob rule, and like it's that guy's fault. Why? Because look at his skin color, get him, right?
Yes.
So and
this is my opinion, is the United Nations are trying to get rid of the Constitution in the States, the Charter of Rights. They're going to get rid of God and put themselves as God.
We're watching it in real time. I think
Yes.
100% we're watching that in real time. Yeah, Thomas.
Yeah, exactly, right. I mean, it's as old as humanity. It's a battle of good and evil.
Yes.
As simple as that is.
Yes.
And there's a guy from Poland who lived through the communist takeover after the Second World War, and he is the world renowned on ponerology, which is the study of psychopaths. And he wrote a book. I put the links in the chat there, but it's highly interesting, the dynamics. It's similar what happened there, and his opinion is that especially North Americas, we're like limping like 50 years behind. That sort of takeover and similar stuff happened in Europe, in the like 30s, 50s, 40s, and so forth. And then we're just limping behind, but it has reached our coast now, and it's similar in makeup. The strategy is very similar, and his claim is that there's about 6% of psychopaths in the population at all times.
Oh yeah,
they're everywhere, right? And it's just the fact of life, and you have to, if you can't accept that there's such a thing of evil, because we're trying to rationalize unrational behavior, right? And we're trying to wrap our head around, why would they do that? Why would they do that? And maybe they don't need a freaking reason. His theory is
maybe it's just chaos. Yeah.
Well, no, it's not chaos. They want power. They don't want, like his theory is that they just have bad intent, and they have an advantage by having us do the work, and they rake in the fruits of it and stuff like that, right? And they can boss you around all day while they, do. I mean, again, nothing new. That's been going on for millennia.
Yeah. So the Second World War, right at the end there, when the nuclear program was going hot and they wanted to finish the war, and the US was recruiting all sorts of scientists. At that point in time, they were recruiting Nazi scientists, and then a bunch of Nazis went to South America, and there's South American German speaking towns. So when people talk about, and what year, by the way, was the United Nations formed again? What year were all these global groups formed, right? What was the seeds for all of this? Like all of that has history that is lost to.
I mean, there's many opinions about that.
Well, right,
but
there's
the
truth.
Problem is that there was definitely psychopaths involved.
Yes, for sure.
Obvious would be like Hitler and Stalin, and others, right?
Yeah,
and this is his thing, right? So you have those, but they are in fact powerless unless they recruit and they got their minions. And this is what you're seeing now when you're asking, why is it that one pastor stands up and says no? Why? Because those people are fundamentals, right? Like they have a certain belief system and principles, and they cannot go past it. And then you have others who maybe get duped into it. I mean, God knows why,
I think,
right? But
yeah. Well, I
they
think
still do, though, right?
Yeah,
And that, you know, in my opinion, they all go into hell. I mean, especially if you're a Christian, you know, I mean, if you go against God, that's on you, my friend. You know,
yeah,
I don't see, like, I don't worry about that too much, really, because
yeah,
you're done as
yeah,
far as I'm concerned, right?
yeah,
Never mind me,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. I
So
hear you. There's a lot I agree with there. Yeah. Care Bear, glad to see you, buddy.
Hey y'all. How's everyone doing?
Good, man.
Good. Yeah, you know, everything you guys are saying about how this kind of discussion about the supremacy of God has evolved, like that this conversation has evolved is what I think too. Like there's the more I've grown and the more I've kind of thought about this, like you look at the world and it truly does look like there's a battle between good and evil.
Mhm.
Um, and you know, and it does seem like there's this group of oligarchs, I don't know, whatever you want to call them, that they want to see themselves as God. I forget the biblical quote where it's like something to that same effect, where we shall become as gods, or I guess it was the snake in the Garden Eden. It's like, and you shall become as God.
Oh, if you eat the apple, you become, because you'll have
Yeah.
the knowledge. Yeah. And like
Well,
God's really, well, that whole exchange, right? Like the snake, did the snake tell a lie? No, of course not. But would it, right? Of course not, of
yeah,
course not, but because the snake can lie in the representation of the devil. But the snake wasn't lying. Everything he told Eve was true. And but it didn't mean that she was better off for it. But maybe she was, right? Who knows? The jury's out.
yeah, it's a tough. It all comes down to what is the knowledge of good and evil. Is it just the fact that by knowing evil, you
can't stamp it out though. Like whether you know it or not, it exists, which is why the snake is in the Garden of Eden, right? Because like you can't, it, the world can't exist in perfect balance all the time, right? Like the lion's going to get hungry and going to eat something.
Well, I think that's part of the perfect balance. Like if there was no evil, what would good be? There would be no good. It would just be stagnation, right? It would just be nothing.
Yes.
But getting kind of like coming back to the kind of supremacy of law, like whereas the supremacy of laws, or the supremacy of God is recognized, and the rule of law. And I wonder, like, why would you link those two things in that preamble? Like, of all the things you could say, like, why do you could just say, like, why did they need to include the supremacy of God? And why did they need to include the rule of law?
Good question. Really good question. Can I take a crack at it? Because I have a quick theory, and then like Jason, you can actually give us an idea. Because this is just I think that the supremacy of God is undeniable because you have free thought and free will to a degree. Like if you're hungry, you're going to be preoccupied with that, but you can decide if you have a peanut butter sandwich or something else, until something like, if you walk into your kitchen and there's a wrecking ball in there, all of a sudden the sandwich kind of goes out the window. So you have free will to a point. So we have free will. So because we have free will, you have to contend with that. Like I was kind of saying earlier, you can't ignore it. Just like you can't ignore the snake in the Garden of Eden. It's going to be there, whether you know it or not, because what was in perfect balance can fall out of perfect balance. What the conversation that was finished yesterday with your 13-year-old daughter, let's say, is not finished today because something changed, right? And so because of that, because of differing, changing opinions, etc., there's always going to be that free will that's going to be chaotic. And the rule of law is it's the mix, it's the meeting of the rule of law and the recognition of the supremacy of God, in that you can't legislate somebody from having a thought, right? You might be able to silence their tongue, but you can't stop that thought. That's my thought on it. Okay, Jason, what do you think?
Well, you kind of want to, it's great because you want to talk about the spiritual component, but you also want to explain it so that anyone who's just listening can say, oh yeah, that makes sense. Just simply like appeal to like the law of gravity. You have to appeal to the fact that, okay, we can't we tried to defy it, we tried to get rid of it, we tried to ignore it, but every time I still fall at the same rate that the law of gravity would require.
It's there, you have to deal with it.
Dynamics, things are not created or destroyed, they just change form and they favor chaos. So these are factors that it's almost like humanity has tried. They tried their best to eliminate it.
Yes.
And
tried and tried and tried. Yeah.
it
Yes.
keeps passing the test. So when you understand the supremacy of God, you try to eliminate God, and yet the rule of law is kind of synonymous with that. It just we tried, and I think as society goes, that's how your conscience then is begins to get informed, because at that point you're saying, okay, this is like tested metal, and now your conscience is informed by that, saying, okay, well, I don't want to mess with that. And from there you go on to the next weak link. But when it comes down to how the charter is written, I can't be an academic about it. I can just work at it from how really the influence of, say, like church and society comes into play at that point. So there's kind of you can't see God, but yet you witness the effects of what's happening in society. So those are just observations that I think happen as people spend time like this in groups too, and get to know how everyone else is trying to understand this. So I did want to make sure I answer your question there about the how the church accepts subsidies, but I know that Julie's had her hand up.
Yeah. We'll come back to the subsidies. It's on my list here, actually. So when we run this dry a little bit, we'll get back to the subsidies. Julie or Care Bear, I think we're good. Yeah.
Well, I was just.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I think what you guys are saying is falling in line with what I was thinking, but essentially what that line is saying is that the rule of law is a consequence of the supremacy of God, or they're invariably linked. Like if there is no God, like you're saying, if there is no free will, or like you can't shut down a person's thought, or what just comes out of their mind through their soul, or through whatever you want to call it, their spirit inside. Like you can oppress them all you want, but you can't kill that spirit.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Well, yeah. So I guess like if that was not there, then you would have no law.
No.
Right? It would just be a lawless.
No, it would be the rule of
place.
man. Well, but it wouldn't be. It would be a total dictatorship. Like it would be because if you didn't have free will, then you wouldn't operate. You wouldn't necessarily. You'd operate within parameters that you were told, right? And then you'd need somebody to prescribe everything for you. Like do this, then do this, then do this. Because if you don't get to self-generate things.
Well, what I would say is, like, if there's no recognition of a supreme God, then who is to say what is law?
Right.
That's my point, right? So I wonder, like, what does the word law mean? Where does it come from?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
So some people say it represents land, air, water, as described in and the Bible makes reference to that, where it's like there's the land, there's the air, there's the water, and God gave man dominion over, like, the creatures of the land, the fish of the water, and something else about air. So anyway, I don't know. I just brought that up as, like, I like to break things down into their, like, fundamental thing.
Yeah.
And, like, where does law even come from? Like, who is one to say to another, this is the law?
Well, right. And so, like, we're bound by a bunch of, that's the whole, I mean, there's tort law, there's the corporate law, and then there's common law, right? And there's all sorts of different, like, branches of that. And that's, I mean, I think that's a whole other kettle of, and I'm not trying to dodge the question necessarily. I think it's a good one, but I think maybe it's not, it's the other side of this conversation. It's the yin to this conversation's yang, right? Like it's like, if we were discussing the law specifically within that sentence, I would want a lawyer. Like, I'd want a lawyer here to kind of weigh in and like because there is a long tradition of like terminology, right, in law. So I don't want to misspeak or anything like that, because there is, and it goes back so long, which is another reason I'm kind of surprised that we're watching the kind of end of British common law, right, and like the end of this this individual responsibility as people become identifying with their group, right, like as like if you have a if your city has a statue of an old prime minister or something like that, you're guilty until a mob tears it down or something like that, like it's a very different way of envisioning guilt. And I think they're going to start trying to tax us on it, honestly. They're trying to say that, and this is kind of going off on a little tangent, but they're trying to say that the climate change has a debt attached to it, and all of the power that was created this climate change thing, and now we have to pay back that debt. I think they're going to start trying to tax for it. But anyway, it's just like more. I think the laws represent the contract that you enter when you have government services, and like the idea that people get birth certificates and all of that other stuff. As you were saying, see, here's the common law. It comes back to it, right? Sometimes, but people enter the game, and then the game becomes, well, they're giving me all these services. How can I leave this game? Because like in order to participate in this society, this game, I have to play by these rules, and so I have to do this, and I have to do this, and I have to do this. Laws.
Right. Yeah. That's very true. But fundamentally, it's all being done with your agreement.
Yeah.
But you're right.
It's coercion. I mean,
it's coercion 100%, but it's basically like we're getting coerced by, like the electric company.
Yeah. You like that electricity? It'd be a darn shame if that was turned off, eh?
Exactly.
Do you have enough batteries to run your TV? I read I really like sci-fi. I really like sci-fi because it's a trainer for politics. If you're not quite up on politics yet, sci-fi does a good job at creating worlds and political interplay, Dune and stuff.
World building.
Yeah, well, but it's really what's the Expanse is really good as far as political world building. But 2001 was a great series, and they did 2001 all the way to 3001. I really liked Arthur C. Clarke. I thought I read almost everything he wrote. So somebody else finished the 3001 series, and in 3001, the book starts out with one of the astronauts is frozen. Like one of the original astronauts in the original 2001 voyage is frozen, and they pick up his story. Like mankind finds him and then reanimates him, and like, welcome to the year 3000. Like, yay, lucky you. And they put in a brain web or something like that. And he's like, well, I don't really want to have the brain web attached to me. Like, that's not cool, because most people get it put on when they're a baby and they just grow up knowing like they're connected to the interweb or whatever they called it. It was written before 2000. I think it was 99, maybe. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And I remember reading this and thinking it would be the coolest thing to have this, connected to the internet all the time. And I thought it would be amazingly cool. And like, they make it seem really cool in the sci-fi novel. And then the older I get, the less cool I think it is. So I think it's important to get to kids. And I think it's important to install it in children first, like as early as possible, because if you get to reflect on this, it's a terrible trade, right? It's a terrible trade. And we're like, just like the laws that we were talking about there, Care Bear, like you get coerced into student debt. You get coerced into these loans. You get coerced into debt to buy a car. You get coerced into, well, you want a job, so you got to do this and you got to do that. I can't possibly say no to this masking thing. I want to go in there without people looking at me mean, right? Like you make these trades all the time, right? And is it within your control? Like, who's to say? I mean, yes, sure, but there are other factors.
I think you're right, but fundamentally it is within your control.
Yes, it is.
Fundamentally it is.
Yes, it is. It is. And people still farm it out. They still hand over the control. They still hand that over. How's it going, Peter? And that's wild. Thomas.
Yeah. Well, even within the lower system, right? I mean, if you don't respect the law above, again, it all starts with the supremacy of God and his law. And then it goes down the chain, right? And like you said, fine, we're being coerced, but you still sign up with this, right?
Yes.
That's how they get you. And what they're doing now is they're completely they flipped the whole thing, and they're basically destroying it from the bottom up.
Yes.
Right. So you instead of having the parliament decide, they put the health minister or health guy there in front of it, and that's the end of it, right? And everybody nods, and that's it, And with children, of course, children are important, right? But how do you expect the children to learn anything if their parents falter?
Yes.
Right. And why is that? Because they don't think about the higher calling here. Right? You can't make new laws by breaking a higher law. That is even like the very basic understanding with that.
Every medical officer of health across Ontario disagrees with you.
No, I fair enough, but that is our dilemma.
Yes.
It's fundamentalism.
Yes.
It's a fundamental understanding on how those systems work. And if you can't respect that system, then the system will fail. End of story. It doesn't matter what you do.
Yes. Well, we're watching that, and we're watching the system.
We're watching it, and that's why it's important that people like us, we got to stand strong.
Yeah.
You got to do what you need to do, and all I answer is my own consciousness and God, and that's that.
Yeah.
I don't give a damn what they do in Ottawa or in Germany, in Berlin, or whatever they do. Yeah. And speaking of which, never mind arresting a pastor, they even arrest the freaking Santa Claus in front of children.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
Really?
Took him to the Crowbar Motel.
In Germany,
In Germany.
because he was fully dressed up with a beard and all, and like nice and festive, and they arrested him because he wasn't wearing a mask. That's how crazy things are. And many people were upset about it, obviously, right? But there's many people, oh, that crazy guy, you shouldn't,
here's
once you open up to this craziness,
it's
and
madness.
You give them a little bit, they rip your arm right off.
Yeah. Well, here's another, and Jason, I know you've got your hand up, but this is just a quick thought, and then we'll get to you. The war on Christmas, I used to think that was like a Fox News trope. Like it was kind of like something the Simpsons would make fun of yearly. And you're just kind of like, the conservative crazy people. But the older I get, the more I see it. And you see the war on Christmas. And the problem is you remove the reason for the holiday at its core, and you replace it with a commercialized version of Santa Claus. And all of a sudden you've got an entirely different culture with no underpinnings. Like you've got a foundation that needs complete new underpinnings because it's been washed away completely, right? And so that's just one aspect of it. It's a big one, and again, one that I'm noticing more and more, as I get older and try and give my kids what I remember. And I think I do an okay job at that. But like the kids don't go down and sing Christmas songs in the gym anymore. That was one of my favorite memories. Like when I was in kindergarten, grade 1, 2, 3, all the way up to grade 6, and the grade 6s would sing like the rude parts of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, right? Like they don't get to do that anymore. And that's terrible. Right. So that kind of stuff it's a very interesting thing to live through. And not that you don't expect it, but you don't expect to live through interesting times, because sometimes there's hundreds of years where nothing happens, and then like years where hundreds of years happens in 1 year. Jason.
Oh, when I'm thinking back over those same stories, it's basically when you deal with, like I'd call it maybe the fundamentals of socialism. It was explained to me that if I have money and this person wants to take my money, and they take it, that's called stealing. But if this person goes to the government and gets the government to take my money, and then the government gives my money to that person, then it's okay.
Then it's just fine. Yep.
And when I kind of explain that it's kind of an easier way of explaining maybe the motivations of it, because there's one point about laws, because you have your say your physical law that everyone can see, then you have your moral law. Mm-hmm. And to establish moral law, what you have is you have a battle of, okay, do people want to listen to some verse in the Bible, or is it just a collective whole survey says? And when we deal with how society's going, the simple, I guess, fundamental part of how the Bible would explain it is, first, society either obeys the truth or they reject it. Mm-hmm. And then when they reject it not just because it's irrelevant, they believe a lie. And then that believing of a lie kind of unleashes this judgment on society for doing that. They get into, the Bible would say they get into a moral collapse. And then after your moral collapse manifests itself with.
Is that before or after Cuties?
Not sure.
Oh, Cuties was a Netflix show that had the twerking,
Oh, okay, yeah.
the twerking preteens. Yeah, sorry.
And a lot of people, they'll get stuck on the moral collapses, but really what we're dealing with now in the timeline of it is a mind that doesn't work. So you have sort of the moral collapse of the 60s, the 70s, and then another collapse in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
But really what we're dealing with now is what's called the non-functioning mind.
Mm-hmm.
And why I spend more time on that than wanting to dive into some of the other matters is because if I can get people's confidence back in the Bible and they believe the truth again, and then now we start recovering from those collapses to the point where, oh, socialism, well, that's theft. And that's theft because now we start to deal with some of the things that, anyway, like I'll quickly deal with the refugee point here, and Thomas can chime in too, where
sure,
the Catholic Church will base their refugee on this idea of strangers in the land. And so it's how God said to Israel, you're to care for your strangers in the land. And how you deal with that component when you recognize the politics behind it with a form of government subsidies, you deal with the fact that, well, Israel themselves were strangers in the land of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
So strangers in the land were not people that just had no respect for your borders or any of the other factors that bring that about. Strangers in the land were people that dwelt in that land, and the government was overseeing that part. So when you have those battles, you're getting past sort of the money component, and now you're getting back onto this, okay, here's what the Bible says. And that's, I think that the fundamental part of coming against communism is people have to start to see that this is all about defending private ownership.
It's garbage. That's what
because what we have is everyone that would take that position of government.
I agree, right? And I mean, in the Old Testament, since the Old Testament, like taking interest from somebody was punishable by death, and that was on the books until like the 1700s, right? Until people figured, like, again, some psychopath came in, right? And then they weaseled their ways and convinced people, because again, bribery, corruption is at the root of all.
Yep.
No matter how you look at it. I keep telling people that our biggest problem, forget all the mess, if you sort the corruption, this shit ends immediately. But you need to be strong and you need to punish people. I'm not good anymore just by accountability. I want action. I want like people going down for this.
I want the OJ trial. I want OJ trials.
That's not what the fucking guy got off. Like, what are you?
OJ?
What's that gonna do?
Yeah, well, right.
No, you got to make an
point.
example. That is unacceptable.
Good point.
To
No,
kill people like randomly, whatever, right? It's. I mean, but you can blab all. You know, I mean, I've tried and I give up. You know, because if they don't see it, then you have to go down the rabbit hole. And our job is, in my opinion, is to stay alive, stay around, preach the word, tell the truth, no matter what. And maybe some of it will stick for the future, because we're done.
There's certainly, well, and so the Second World War was, I mean, if you look at the whole thing, like I read the Winston Churchill's outline of the Second World War, his memoirs of it, and it lasted, 1931 was Hitler was Times Man of the Year, right? Like 1931, he started invading other countries in 1936, right? He invaded portions of Russia and then into Europe too, right? And then, so like, I don't think we should lose hope, because we've seen conflict like this before in the world, and it recovered in a sane way. So there's I'm not going to say we're in the clear, because I don't believe we are, but there's certainly not a reason to throw in the towel. I don't think, not quite yet anyway. But I do understand how dire things are, and I do understand that it's difficult to bridge the what the gap of, because like either you see what's going on or you don't, and you can't experience waking up for somebody else, right? Like you can't, if somebody's like, well, you know, the Ontario Medical Officer of Health said that we should all get 7 boosters, and you're like, oh, okay, I guess, you know, like if you could do gentle, you know, attempts to wake them up, but you can't be like, listen, like there's a depopulation agenda, and you know, like that's not going to work. And like we've got to find a balance to talk about this, because society needs to talk about this. We've got to find a way for accountability, because we need accountability as a society. I agree with you that it's frustrating, but I have seen the world return from chaos, from like a second world war, to sanity. So I'm hopeful that we can see a return to sanity.
Oh, we will see that. There's
hope we do.
I have no zero doubt, right? Because the next big thing that will come is if there's an uprising or some sort of awakening, because no one more people get hurt, they're gonna pull the credit card, and that's the end of that, right? So, and then people will again falter, because that I would understand, because you got to do what you got to do, right, to survive, because it will be very basic, right? If they fold the money and then everything crumbles around you, they will have no property. Then they got their, it's not even socialism. They literally, Hitler and Stalin made babies. That's what we're looking at.
Yeah. Well, and I like, it's funny because sometimes I have conversations with people and I say, you don't have to look far in history. Like Mao, Pol Pot, Hitler, Stalin, North Korea, you know, modern examples of horror on the earth that are inflicted by man on man, because they think that they're like Kim Jong-il, I think the dad, not the guy, not the one who's in charge right now. He was in North Korea, he was worshipped like a god. I don't know if the son is now worshipped like a god, but like we have to pay attention to these things. These things happen, and you know the kulaks, right? Like you don't have to look far in history for an example of a mass starvation event, and it was the leader of a country doing it to his own people because he had them scapegoated. What's happening right now? Scapegoating, right?
Well, we don't have a leader; we have leaders. Multiple. Right? That's worse. You know.
Lots of cooks in the kitchen, very expensive.
Yeah, it's bad.
Yeah. Okay, Ryan, and then Peter, and then Care Bear.
Yeah, I agree with you guys there, Jason and Thomas, that we've been duped. Our grandparents are duped, our parents are duped, our grandparents are duped. Way back to the 1700s, these psychopaths have come in, they put banks, they put the common law stuff in, like banks, the you know, the currency, all that stuff. We've all been duped. And I think right now, with all this COVID happening and all these they want us to take these injections, jabs, and they're forcing it on us. It's actually separating people, and people are building independent communities. They are sick and tired of being governed over by these other people. Yes, they might have elected them in or whatever, but they're waking up. They're going, why am I being governed by this? You know what? God gave us every resource for every man and woman on this planet, not the corporations. God didn't say in the Bible, the corporations get the resources. No, and that's what's happening right now. I'm hoping this happens, that people are going into these little communities. They're joining together. They're building. They're doing. They're with science, medical, everything, and they're becoming independent. And I think that's what we have to go back to. We have to, and then we're going to teach our children again. Hey, you don't have to be governed by this person. You govern yourself. And, you know, I think things are happening. I think I'm a little bit optimistic. We're in the beginning of it, right?
Yeah. Well,
like,
and I
God
don't think
gave us all the resources. Everybody can share, right?
I saw a tweet today from Millhouse. He's a guy I use on my show sometimes for data and numbers and stuff. And he said, we don't have to burn it down. It's burning itself down. We just have to watch. And like that, there's nothing, well, there's going to be a reckoning. I don't think this continues forever. And I mean, like it can continue day by day and year by year too. But I don't think it continues forever. There's going to be a switch. And I mean, we may lose, like the people who think like us may not lose in the final balance, or may not win in the final balance. And that's, I mean, that's true with any game you play, right? Life is akin to a game in some ways. But it's not going to stay like this forever. There's going to be a tipping point. It's going to, either the public is just going to continue to shrug, and this
Something
is going
has
to
to give.
well, but the public, if the public continues to just ignore this, then where we are stays the status quo, right? And nobody changes. It doesn't go back. It gets worse, and nothing changes. And if the public does push back, then things change a little bit. And you know, we're seeing Doug Ford and Jason Kenney start to tell Justin Trudeau that they're not going to implement more restrictions, et cetera. So, you know, maybe there's something changing, but
I'm not sure.
Well, a lot of
Remember
people
when
I
they
talked
said they
to-
weren't going to implement like vaccine passports?
I
And
remember.
look where we are.
I
A lot
remember.
of people I talk to, they're not looking at just the one thing anymore. It's the
Everything.
whole package.
Yep.
Yes,
Yes.
everything has to be revamped. Right?
I agree. Well, but it's not because it's not working because the central, well, it's not working for a whole lot of reasons. Okay, Peter.
But sorry, I'm late. So
No, nice to see you.
But you know, we talk about accountability, but I think with that is people need to be held accountable.
Mhm.
And you look at Ontario, Quebec, Michigan, New York, New Jersey, where you know they just dump seniors, knowing full well that they were at risk. And I mean, I'm familiar with Ontario because I worked in the healthcare system, and it's been an issue that's going on for 30 years. Empty the hospitals of these inconvenient seniors and get them the hell out. Well, you know, in this latest whatever, chickens came home to roost with the seniors in Ontario, similar to the other states. But then when you think of these medical officers of health, like Moore is the up and coming Mengele in Ontario. Like the man is evil. And I think that woman in Guelph, Mark,
Mercer,
she's the Cruella de Vil in Toronto.
Yeah.
Evil people, and they need to be held accountable, not just accountability for decisions. I mean, they are responsible for
They are responsible. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I can't, well, I don't even get responses from the Board of Health.
Oh, I know. They're just
it's unbelievable. And like
need to be a public audience as they walk up the steps to the gallows. That is
unmasked.
That they have placed themselves in. They are truly evil incarnate in our society.
It is quite something. I'm not sure. Well, I don't think that most people, and I say this a lot, I don't think that you play the bad guy in your own, like nobody's Darth Vader. Nobody's going to bed going, you know, like I really crushed those rebels tonight or today, right? Like, so when I try and put myself in their headspace, but I can't fathom how a well-crafted question to like an entire board of people with like I did a 30 pages.
Oh, I know.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, and I mean, that was last year. That was in like,
been there, done that.
But it doesn't matter.
I've had to answer questions like that.
Right.
And
So like, I just can't fathom how people can just sit there and be like, well, I'm not going to, if I answer this question, or if I think about this question too much, then what's going to happen is my entire reality comes crashing down and I can't deal with that. So, or I guess maybe that's an explanation, but I just can't fathom being that locked into anything.
But seeing Doug Ford talk today, I mean, the man was a blithering idiot the way he was going on and on.
He didn't sound very confident. I agree.
Oh, I mean, you know, like we joked the other day. I mean, this variant has killed more people, or has killed less people than Alec Baldwin.
Yeah. How many people has he shot on set? Yeah. No, it's incredible. It's incredible. Care Bear.
I just wanted to plug the argument that like all the tyranny is causing people to wake up. And I wonder if it's what's the chicken, what's the egg? Because I argue the tyranny has ramped up in a super irresponsible way. Because like, you know, I've been since 9/11, I've been like on to these guys, and you know, the way they've rolled out COVID is like it's taking a lot of those people who were like, no, come on, there's no conspiracy, and it's and it's
Joe
getting
Rogan.
to such an absurd level that it's like what are these people doing? Are they they're basically spoiling this whole agenda they made over hundreds of years or whatever it is.
Well,
right?
at least 50 years. Yeah, at least 50 years, since at least the 70s. Probably.
So my point,
yeah.
My point is that I think like the awakening has been happening, and they've been starting to sweat and sweat and sweat. And if you remember, it used to be called Agenda 21, and now it's Agenda 2030.
Yep.
They're sweating.
And 2050 is net zero. But Joe Rogan, in his talk with, who is it, Peter? Was it Peter McCullough? Okay, no, it was somebody else. There was a new, like, I saw it maybe 20 minutes before we started the show here, and I was having my microwave blew up, like the inverter died, so the guy showed up to do the microwave. And this is just a quick anecdotal story to back up what you were saying there, Care Bear. But he showed up to I'm getting distracted. I was going to tell another story. But I'm going to tell this. But he showed up and he was doing the microwave, and he said, these masks are terrible. You know, I can't deal with them. I said, well, don't wear it on my account. And he said, I'll wear it, but it's stupid. And I said, yeah, well, it just keeps getting stupider, doesn't it? And he said, every day the government comes out with something new and I just can't deal with it. I'm just like, I'm done. And it's people who are waking up, and like the more tyranny, the more, I don't know if it's chicken or egg. I don't know what's causing it, but at the end of the Soviet Union, people would like, there's accounts of people saying like the news didn't make sense anymore. The things people were talking about were crazy. And now I get what that means, because the people in charge were losing control, and all they had was fear. So they're like, if you don't, we're going to send, remember what we did 20 years ago, right? Remember that COVID thing? It was so bad. We're going to get, that virus is going to get you. So it's fear that they're trying to bring to bear. And it's their own panic that's palpable, maybe. Maybe, you know, so I hope so. Right.
Go back to the accountability issue that Peter brought up.
Sure.
And just because we're talking about the supremacy of God, I've told my management at times, I says, you know, it's really funny. I work for God and Chartwell pays me. Don't you find that funny? And so my thing is, these people will pay, and it won't be here. God will take care of them, and it's not going to be pretty. And I don't think they have the fear of God. The fear they're trying to put in people is demonic. It just is kind of sad, because what I look at, because I'm more afraid of him than I am of them. So I think we need to, if we're talking about God in this issue today, I think that's a really important point, Peter, that they are going to really pay for what they, and I don't think, if we don't make them accountable, God will. That's what I believe. So
yeah, it's a good point.
God help you. And can I just bring up the point, my husband's family is Russian Mennonites from the Bolshevik movement. And so when this all started, I looked at my husband and I said, oh my gosh, I said, this is like what your parents went through. And I said, and then he said, but there's nowhere else to go, because they went to Canada, US, Mexico, South American countries, Australia. They all immigrated to all these because of their faith. Because they were very affluent people in Russia. They were brought over by Catherine the Great to farm the best land, because obviously the people didn't know how to do it. So they were very well off, a lot of Mennonites. And so then when this communist thing came, they were being slaughtered, and there was a whole program that brought them over here. So we sort of paralleled that with my husband's experience. And there's many people who have gone through religious persecution, you know, in every faith, not just in the Christian faith, but it's kind of, if you look at it, it's quite interesting. I wear a Star of David now, because I've had one person say something to me, and it's interesting because I got it at a rally in Windsor, downtown, at their rally. And I thought, well, this is really interesting, because what I see personally is what happened to the Jews during World War II. And it's just this whole And so I wear the Star of David very proudly, and because basically being born again Christian, you're adopted into the family of Abraham. So that's sort of my way of, I guess, shunning it. I don't know. I can't figure out the evil that Peter, you hit it right on the spot. They're just evil people, and there's lots of evil people trying to control. And I find it very interesting that I elected somebody, but the health unit is running the show.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't compute with me. As a politician, I would hope that they would ask for advice and bring forward things, but it seems like it's very scattered, out of hand. I don't know.
Well, it's all coordinated, the public health and all that other stuff. But yeah, no, you brought up some excellent points, and thank you for all of that. And there's a couple of things I was going to respond to, but I would have ruined your flow, and I didn't want to. So I'm just going to get Care Bear. I'm going to go to Kinster, or are you done or no?
Oh yeah, go ahead. Go to Kinster.
Okay, Kinster. Oh, is she muted? You're muted. Or she's frozen, or I'm frozen. Nope. I guess Kinster's frozen. So apologies about that. Jason, do you want to talk about, well, we've talked about how the left worship government, but dismantling communism. Kinster, when you're back, let us know. She can't hear me. Okay. Talk about dismantling communism with the Bible. Let's talk. Let's go from that angle.
Yeah, just to kind of illustrate this in a couple of different ways. I remember my grandfather telling me when they were working, and he grew up in the sawmill basically industry, and he said that these people the owners came from overseas, and they looked at the parking lot, and they were just surprised at how all the people all had cars. And they thought, wow, how come these people have so much money that even the workers can afford vehicles? And so this battle of what I really want to say is where I saw this whole scheme turning out to be what it is this wealth distribution key. So communism, I always have your friend of the government role. And, we've seen one thing is we've seen these big pharma people just rake in all the money. Well, that's money that, they looked at this map, so to speak, this demographic, and said, oh, they're ripe for the picking here. All we need to do is pay off a couple government officials. So if I can accomplish one thing, and thanks, Mark, for obviously organizing this, and if you ever need assurance that you're making a difference, these are very important moments to look back on. So because just being able to remind everyone that if people start to see these health officials and so on as representing some sort of wealth redistribution scheme,
mm-hmm.
now you're going to be able to bring in some sort of moral argument to this, because I made the point about how people always want to say the Bible teaches communism, and they'll talk to certain passages in the book of Acts where it talks about how people shared what they had. Well, it doesn't say that they gave everything. It says they provided for what was needed. And yet the best passage to kind of get people to understand this from a moral standpoint is just to say, well, private ownership, is it defended in the Bible? And the best argument for that is just basically appeal to one of the 10 commandments and say, well, if God was against people having possessions or owning stuff, then there wouldn't be a seventh commandment, thou shalt not steal,
mm-hmm.
be irrelevant.
Yep.
If no one is allowed to own anything, then why have a commandment that protects what people own?
Yeah.
And when people start to wake up to that, and then they see these representatives of these wealth schemes, so to speak, fraud, then that okay, these people are actually fighting against God.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to steal and violate a simple commandment that when you talk about the rule of law, that's where once you come to those terms that, okay, the Bible actually defends my right to work, own, have a living, if a worker is worthy of his wages, then that's where the supremacy of God comes in. Because now you realize that, somehow in the divine providence, God has made it so that the government is actually there now to be held accountable for defending that right. And therefore you can appeal not to the fundamentals of freedoms or even the guarantee of rights and freedoms, but you can go even above that and say, look, we have the supremacy of God. That's why this simple fundamental right of thou shalt not steal is protected.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as people start to rally around those points, you start to see through the pro and anti-vax stuff. You actually start to see, okay, these are just ways of pitting people against each other so that they can continue stealing, robbing people blind.
Yeah, and it's ramped up too.
Yeah.
Snakes. Okay, Kinster. Sorry, Jason, I'm going to cut you off a little bit. And Kinster, welcome back. Sorry, you were frozen last time.
Sorry, I cut off there.
That's all right.
Had to cook dinner and stuff too earlier. Anyways, Jason and Mark, thank you so much for doing this. I don't know. I've got like 5 billion things going through my head right now. I made some notes here though. But isn't it like do unto others as you would want done unto you? And I'm not baptized. I was raised, my mom's side of the family is Roman Catholic, but I have never been so believing in my life than I am now.
Yeah, I agree.
And there is definitely some sort of evil going on because I can't comprehend in my head how these people are justifying their decisions and how they are living their lives at this point. And there has to be something going on. Like I've had other discussions.
Okay.
The matriarch, Queen Elizabeth, and who's taking over. Okay, it's Chucky the Bear there, and
Mr. Globalist.
And Mr. Globalist, and they're all about all this stuff, but they're not following any of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really having a hard time. Like, my boyfriend's decided not to, at this point, we've decided not to, for him to apply for a religious exemption because basically he's been told it's going to be denied.
Mm-hmm. And where does he work? Well, you don't have to. What industry? What industry?
He's a respiratory therapist at a hospital.
Okay, so that's difficult. Yeah, and I mean it's not
but it's such BS.
Yep.
Like, sorry for my language, but if this is part of our Constitution, how is this not being recognized?
Yeah.
And it's if you take one part, you have to accept the other part.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're accepting law, you have to accept God because God is above all else, is what I've read. So if that's not, I think it's under Rob, but I know your name's different.
Liz
Beautiful lady Liz. But it's just, it's very hard for me to understand at this point how our world has become so blatantly blind to what was indoctrinated, at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And it's just like law, like Care Bear brought up. Where did law come? Yeah, it's law, air, and land, or land, air, and water. Sorry. But where did that come from? That came from God.
Mm-hmm.
Because God, in my understanding, gave us all of this.
Well, and I mean, that goes back to the science usurping God, right? Like that goes, when you say, where does it all come from and where does it all go back to? It's so deep that, well, okay, Einstein's theory, it's this deep. Einstein's theory removed, it used to be called like ether. Like there was an unknown kind of medium. Without the ether, the physics isn't explained properly. And then Einstein came up with E equals mc squared, and it got rid of the ether. And it's a very basic kind of understanding of that, but the ether was a very important aspect of what, science, up until Einstein conveniently got rid of it for them, right? And then the theory of relativity and all of that science got built up to explain ourselves. And so like a big explosion 14 million years ago from nothing. Okay, like, where's your data? Let's look at it. Right? Oh, do I have to have some faith to believe your story? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a little bit science. It's a little bit religious-y, right? This whole science thing that they've got going. So it's very, I don't know.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah,
Yeah.
Big Boom explains
Big
it
Boom.
all. Yeah,
Just
like,
believe me. Just, you have to have something, faith. Totally happy.
Well, and I think like Mark, you posted, I believe it was yesterday. It was into regards to Trump. I don't remember the title of the
Oh, okay.
the documents there. It was like articles, like the guy had
The three,
there.
yeah,
wartime presidency.
Yes.
yeah, the wartime presidency thing. Yep.
But I think of that in regards to this as well.
Oh yeah,
Where
no,
it's
it's all
like-
connected. It's all
It's
connected.
all connected.
All of the
you
Western
know?
governments are doing exactly the same thing, and they don't have justification to do it. All of the premiers are pretty much in lockstep doing the same thing. Ireland, Scotland, Australia's batshit crazy. Some blue states are crazy. Some red state. DeSantis, the governor of Florida, is the bastion of freedom in this entire world. Like, it's crazy, yo. And like, I mean, to miss it, you'd have to be freaking blind or indoctrinated, I think.
Yeah, totally.
Right. So, yeah,
No,
no,
but I
it's
think
crazy, man.
it's very relative into what we're dealing with, even with God.
Yes.
It's like we're
I agree.
all kind of sitting back. Like part of me feels God's waiting on the sidelines for
The
all
opportune
of this,
moment,
the opportune moment.
Christmas Day.
I know. Yeah,
I hope so.
I know what I think.
I
But
hope so.
Can I just say, personally, God isn't waiting on the sidelines. He's in this. He's in this, and it just read Revelations, read Daniel's, read Ezekiel, go into all the prophecies that haven't happened. Like, so when you're talking about the tribulation and everything, it's God is in control. You have to believe that, okay, Kinster? He is in control of this, and Jesus is coming back real soon. I'm just like, it's so, we live in an exciting time. This is a terrible time, but it's an exciting time.
Yeah, some years, 100 years happens, right? In 1 year.
so I got just one more question. So
sure,
for
go ahead,
Liz, if shit really goes down, like this is a legitimate question, but like, what extent would you be willing to take to fight back for yourself at that point? I think, like, if someone were to come knocking on your door and say, like, I'm taking you away, would you just give up, give in, and okay, let them take you and just believe in God and he's gonna save you at that point?
Oh, he's already saved me. So
Yeah, well,
that's already given.
yeah.
I don't know, I really don't, because those are the things that, when I look at past history and how I'm looking at this Nazism thing and the Bolshevik movement, the whole thing, and looking at what's happening today. And it's just like, I don't know how I'm going to react, because, I'm a real big Holocaust reader. And for years, I would walk outside in bare feet in my pajamas in the winter to see what it would be like. That sounds weird, but it was just my way of trying to think, how did these people survive? And I think now at 67, I'm looking at it, I don't think I could survive. I mean, at 30.
Well, a lot of people didn't.
Exactly. And you know what? I used to say, and this is awful, but I said, as we get older, I think they're just going to line us up and shoot us because there's so many baby boomers.
But they're not shooting you. They're going to inject you. They're going to convince
Exactly.
you. They're going to convince
that's going to
you.
be the shot.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It'll be convincing you or the person legally in charge of you that you want to die.
To kill you. Yeah. And so you know, Kinster, I can't really, I think I would fight. I
Yeah.
really,
So hold on. I'm going to, not to say I want to cut you off there, Liz.
I know
But
time's running out.
time is running out, and it's one of those things that I kind of like. I think that that's a really, really interesting question, and I don't know that it's one that can be answered in a form like this. And I think that it would be like, I don't want anybody to feel put on the spot or anything like that, and not to like, I don't think it was uncomfortable or anything like that. That's not what I think the intent was, or anything. But I think that it's such a poignant question. Like, it's a great question, Kinster, because like I've been asked the same question, and I think that it's such a personal thing that I almost want like you and the audience to reflect on that. Like, if you're unjabbed and they come and knock on your door, are you going to take it to get them to go away? Are you going to go with them? Because if they don't, they're going to fine your family $5,000 and take you anyway. That's real. That's happening, right? Like, and not in Canada necessarily, but it is happening in Australia. It is happening in other places. And it looks like that's on the map. And I don't know if that's going to happen in the next 3 months or 6 months, or if it's going to happen at all. I hope it doesn't. But it's something that bears thinking about. It's something that I've been asked.
Well, it's
And
all
I
hypothetical a
couldn't,
little bit, right?
I couldn't
mean,
answer it, right? Because like well, I couldn't
none
answer
of us can until that day
until it's
comes,
there. Yeah.
right?
And, but you
So
got to think
because
about it.
even all I, you know, for myself, like I have to remind myself, you know, like again, under God, I answer to God, and that's it. And may what come, right?
Yeah.
But I cannot, like for me personally, we have been created by God in his image, and anything that messes with that image and his creation is an abomination and has to be opposed. And
Yep.
you know, whether you go and do whatever, right? But that's all I have.
Yeah.
Personally.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to Peter and Care Bear, and thank you, Kinster. I'm glad that you didn't freeze or anything like that. That was good. I'm glad you didn't go away. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not well versed in this topic, so I guess this is a question to Jason or just whatever. But I mean, what's your take on how these pastors were dealt with, like Arthur Pawlowski, and I forget, I'm sorry, I can't remember the other two fellas in Alberta, but Pastor Hildebrand in Elmer, Ontario, how they were so badly treated when, you know, there are actually laws against interrupting services that pastors are holding. And also the cops, the Elmer police, the Calgary police, the RCMP, you know, with their oaths of office are to the Constitution, the first line of which is the supremacy of God. Like, what's your take on how they, you know, are these just the Gestapo following orders? Like, I'm at a loss for how they treat these pastors. And, you know, and also I've been reading things, and I don't know how true they are, that a lot of the clergy have been bought off. I don't know by, well,
yeah,
the government, but I don't know who or the mechanism that they were bought off. But anyway, I mean, it's just something I thrown out. And I thought,
goodness,
you know, Jason, you're more adept at this than I am. Do you have any thoughts or insights or?
So Peter, sorry, I'm just going to jump in quick. We actually did kind of touch on all of that.
Oh, did you? Oh, so I missed that. Okay.
Before you got here, yeah, we talked about that, and like
I'll read the notes. I'll read the Cole's notes later.
That's okay. Well, you can. I mean, you can watch it again. But no, it was. I mean, sorry to like usurp you, Jason. Do you want to? Is there anything you want to kind of give a quick overview or?
Yeah, I was going to touch upon the fact that, yeah, we talked about subsidies at the beginning.
Yeah, subsidies and like, yeah, they're basically paid off. Like the clergy are paid off, but in like an above the board way. Like, and Jason was saying that they use portions of the Bible to justify this because, you know, blah blah blah. But it didn't actually say that. But I mean, the Bible's up to everybody's interpretation. And yeah, we chewed the fat on all of that. So
I'll
rewind. We'll watch. I'll put it up soon. Okay, Care Bear, and then we'll say goodnight.
I just wanted to answer to Kingster's thing of what are you going to do when they come knocking. So I have this nice little no soliciting or advocacy sign I made where it basically reads that we charge $10,000 per minute to listen to any sales, fundraising, religious messages, medical and or vaccine advocacy, or any other soliciting activity of any kind.
Ooh,
not listed here, wonderful. Must be paid in advance, minimum payment 10,000, cash, gold, silver, or Bitcoin.
Good.
And then by knocking, so here's the thing, this has to be like plastered right in the center of the door. By knocking on this door, ringing the doorbell, or entering this property, you are acknowledging your voluntary acceptance and understanding of these terms and conditions, and that you are legally bound to these terms and conditions Thank you. Smile, you're on camera.
Yeah.
So if they knock on the door, you open and say 10,000, please. You get their ID, of course, because you're going to need somebody to open a lawsuit
To
against.
invoice, yeah.
And then you have them on video accepting your terms and agreements, and they owe you $10,000.
Yeah.
And
Boom.
that'll be the whole discussion of anything.
Yeah.
Can
No,
you,
I like
can
that.
you
That's
send that to Mark? Can you send a PDF to Mark and then he
Sure,
can
I'll
us?
yeah, I'll put it
send
up
to
on.
you. Yeah.
I'll put it up. I'll announce it on my show. Thanks,
Okay.
Kara. Do that. Yeah. Wow. This was a robust conversation, and we could have honestly gone for another half an hour or maybe even more. I'm blown away by the level of discussion that we always get on these. Thank you, Jason, for bringing this topic to my attention and to working with me to bring it to fruition. I'm glad that we were able to talk about what we've talked about, and I think that we've got some questions that were brought to the surface that were bubbling, but I hadn't articulated them very well, or I hadn't thought about them in a way that was making it very in focus for me. And there's a bunch of the conversations and a bunch of the things that we've talked about tonight that kind of crystallize that. So we're definitely going to do this again. I don't know if it'll be on Supremacy of God. Maybe we'll do the law discussion. Maybe we'll look for a lawyer who wants to come on. If there's a lawyer who wants to come on and talk about the law and the rule of law with us, that would be wonderful. I'm sure we could fill an hour and a half for that. But I think fundamentally having these conversations with a diverse group of people, hearing from different perspectives, hearing from different walks of life, different experiences, it does nothing but help the understanding and help my understanding. And I hope it helps yours. So thanks for watching. Thanks for joining us. Thanks everyone in the panel for being here tonight, and hang out. We'll talk in the green room before you go, and catch us next time. We'll be doing this a lot more. So have a wonderful evening.